in order to grow that 12%, they're going to burn $100 million on the way to get there. Let's just pretend you're a $200 million company and that you spend $100 million on sales and marketing every year. 3 years ago, you were growing at 30 to 50%, and this year you're going to grow at 12%. In order to grow that 12% from 200 million to whatever the math is, 220 million more or less, they're going to burn $100 million on the way to get there, which means that their growth rate is 12%, their EBITDA margin is negative 50% or negative 40%, and if you calculate rule of 40, they're really rule of negative 30. Those companies, I think, will at some point in 2024 have to do a lot of major changes to the business to be able to have the business survive. I think that, and I think we'll start to see this play out in 2024, that 2024 is going to be a reckoning, especially for mid-market companies that are not publicly traded, but are attempting to either IPO or have a very large financial event happen sometime in the next, probably hope it happened last year and then everything changed. And so now their timeline is delayed quite a bit because of the valuations. Just be a really tough time to sell your company right now. Specifically for those companies, and I'm going to talk through why, because there are a ton of companies that are in the 100 million to 300 million in revenue or recurring revenue in tech and SaaS that, let's just pretend you're a $200 million company and that you spend $100 million on sales and marketing every year. And that 3 years ago, you were growing at 30 to 50%. And this year you're going to grow at 12%. And then in order to grow at that 12% on the $100 million in sales and marketing investment and then all the other costs in the business, that in order to grow that 12% from 200 million to whatever the math is, 220 million more or less, they're going to burn $100 million on the way to get there. So to add 24 million in incremental ARR, they're going to burn $100 million as a company, which means that their growth rate is 12%, their EBITDA margin is negative 50% or negative 40%, and if you calculate rule of 40, they're really rule of negative 30. And there's a lot of companies out there that are in some type of position where their rule of 40 calculation is somewhat negative. Somewhere, that was an extreme example, but really there are companies out there that are doing that right now where there is absolutely no way that you can correct the financials. They can't IPO right now. They're not going to be able to exit. They're not going to be able to raise money. And maybe through the lifetime of the company, they've raised $500 million, but they don't have that much cash in the bank anymore, and they're burning $100 million a year. And those companies, I think, will at some point in 2024 have to do a lot of major changes to the business to be able to have the business survive. And so we'll see how it plays out, but there are a lot of companies that are inside of that space. I talked to people that were former employees that understand the financials. I hear what's happening in the market. I study what public companies are doing and then extrapolate that to private companies. And I think that there, specifically within that space, there is going to be some major shakeup that happens in 2024 because it's just not economically viable. And so with all that said, I just wanted to put that on the record. Like I said, I'm not ambulance chasing. I'm just communicating the reality of what's happening. And I'm not going to call out any particular company. I would never do that. But there are a lot of companies that are in that segment that seemingly are the best companies out there in whatever space that they play in, and the financials are just fucking terrible. So with all that said, let's get into signals. Let's get into some stuff. I just put that on the record so that around January of next year, I can be able to pull that clip and I can either say, wow, I was really wrong. All those companies ended up being super successful and I was wrong, or I could be able to pull that clip and say, I was right. I just like putting those things on the record because a lot of the times I'm right. Okay, so let's switch to signals. Key topics here. The first thing is that there's a lot of people in the market talking about signals. And there's a lot of different definitions around signals. And at Paceto, we believe we have the what is the strongest definition and the most useful definition. And so I want to go through what a signal actually means and then differentiate it from what most people are calling a signal when it's actually a touch point. A signal is an action or a behavior that's trackable that comes from either an account or people at that account that then the company decides to employ human capital and sales resources and things like that to be able to take action against that signal, which is the most expensive process in the go-to-market. And so different than a touch point, which is tracking every single thing that somebody does that's trackable, there are a majority of things that are trackable that do not drive a sales action and do not invest human capital and therefore are just creating data and most often noise. And so it's about isolating what are the things that we are going to trigger our sales team to take action against, which is the most expensive part in our go-to-market process. And when we think about a signal is not an attribution mechanism. People get this confused a lot of the time. It is not a mechanism to determine attribution. What it is it's a mechanism to improve the process in your go-to-market. It's a data layer for process improvement that happens and spans across the entire go-to-market, which doesn't exist today. Those are the core distinctions around that. There are a lot of signal providers that provide a lot of signals that your sales team does not take action on, and that is not a signal. As a business, we decide either arbitrarily or based on data what are the signals that our sales team and our human capital is going to invest in order to go and act on that signal. We should be collecting data in real time around the outcomes of those signals and therefore can iterate and optimize what signals we act on all the time. We can have experimental signals, we can have proven signals, and we can have signals that are proven not to work. And that is the process. Now, when you think about a mature go-to-market engine and a mature go-to-market team, your sales team might be using, even though you don't track them, using thousands of different signals and taking millions of actions every year. And to understand inside of all of that data, all of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of times that we act on a signal where we don't win is critically important to fixing the problem that I talked about at the beginning of this episode. By identifying all the places where we invest our most expensive human capital and we lose most of the time, if not all of the time, and then stop doing those things and stop having all the expensive resources to do things that don't work is the number one way to reduce CAC and improve ROI across the entire go-to-market fast. If you don't have the signal data and your data has survivorship bias, which most B2B companies do, where you only look at the times that you win and you don't have all the data around the times that you lose, you never see that. And so the main objective of signals is to optimize the most expensive part of the go-to-market process of having an account that's in market and converting that into a closed-won customer. It's a process of optimizing the go-to-market, not trying to attribute marketing activities to things like a multi-touch attribution software would or something like that. So that's a key distinction here that I want people to recognize. There is a difference between trying to prove the ROI of a Google ad versus trying to find all of the process improvements inside of where our SDR team does thousands of things that don't work and identifying those and getting rid of them. It's a very different objective. And so that's a high level view. We got a ton of questions that were submitted in advance that I think are great questions to queue up based on this. So Sydney's going to walk us through like an order of questions to go deeper into this topic specifically. And then if you all have questions or comments, as always, drop them into the chat and we'll do audience Q&A in a little bit. But the goal of this episode is to clarify our position on signals, given that a lot of people are talking about it. And I think that a lot of people are confusing touch points and signals. So let's talk through that.
Yes, we had a lot of questions around attribution and touch points and buyer journey, understanding what works when versus signals. So I think you covered like at a high level, but what is one thing, what can signal analytics tell you that attribution touch points cannot tell you or lack?
what are the key things that drive our sales team to take action that lead to high sales productivity and sales velocity? What are the conversion rates between stages? Where are things getting clogged in the process? What is the conversion and the velocity from when they take that action to when we hold the meeting, from when we hold the meeting to we get it into pipeline, to when it's in pipeline, to when we close one, and being able to break that down. Some people understand the bow tie framework and the scientific process that Winning by Design is putting out. You're not going to get that information from multi-touch attribution. And so you like signal-based analytics and having a pipeline architecture around signals is the number one way to be able to understand all those different stages, the conversion between the stages, the velocity and the volume.
There's also some confusion around MQLs and signals. There's a lot of chatter around, isn't a signal just an MQL? So can you kind of walk through the difference between tracking signals across your entire go-to-market versus MQLs?
The core recognition is to understand that when your sales team takes action, most of the actions do not come from MQLs. That your sales team does independent prospecting, and either they get a cold lead list, or they call a random account, or they take an action against something in Sales Navigator, or the million other reasons why they could reach out to somebody. And all of that stuff is not an MQL. And another thing is that MQL by definition is a marketing qualified lead. And the objective of signals is to strip out the departmental level structure and to look at the entire go-to-market. And we say, we have all of these available signals. Some of them come from first-party sources. Some of them come from second-party sources. Some of them come from third-party sources. How do we use all of our go-to-market resources, which include sales, SDRs, operations, technology? How do we use all of our resources to be able to optimize around these signals that are not siloed out by department? A big objective of where go-to-market is going is going to be account-based. Much of it already is. It's going to be signal-driven, and it's going to be deeply integrated. We're never going to get to deep integration across the go-to-market team while we keep measuring marketing qualified leads. There's a different way of looking at it, and it would drive you to plan differently that is not based on the MQL, SQL waterfall anymore.
And last week in the chat, a big topic was lead scoring, and how does lead scoring, or any type of scoring for that matter, account scoring, kind of fit in with signals, how we think about it, and signal-based analytics. So I have if you want to kind of just talk about that high level, and then I have some specific questions that get a little bit more in the weeds.
Yeah, just to reiterate the response from last week, lead scoring is a signal, and you might have 7 different lead scoring models that would be 7 different signals. And you might also have 7 different PQL model scores that come from a technology platform, and those would be 7 different other signals. And then you might have 20 different account level scoring models that come from your account-based marketing platform, or you build it ad hoc or grassroots internally, and that would give you 20 other signals. And then you're going to have potentially thousands of other signals that come from first-party sources and third-party sources. And to recognize that lead scoring is just one signal, or one lead scoring model is just one signal. And then if you measured the effectiveness of that particular lead scoring model, you'd probably find that lead scoring model, or that PQL scoring model, is mostly garbage. And so I think those are some of the core high-level topics. I know there's a couple more detailed questions, but to recognize that lead scoring doesn't encompass all signals. It is a signal on its own. And what we lack, for the most part, the outcomes of, is this lead scoring model that then we have our SDRs and our sales team invest time on, and we invest marketing dollars to create the data, to create the signal. Is all of that work and investment a productive use of time and money and resources or not? And if we measured it effectively, and we do at Paceto, the conclusion is usually that it's not.
Yeah, one thing to call out too is most companies use a lot of different tools at the same time to inform their scoring model. At least that's what we see in our current customer base. So they might use, different tools. A native tool, they might do their own scoring and their own marketing automation. They might bring on a tool like a Mad Kudu. They might bring on like a Regi AI or a Warmly. Like there's all these tools that their companies are bringing on, and they're not able to identify which tool is helping them score and prioritize all the different touch points and all the different data that they're getting from all these vendors. So that's kind of layers onto your point, Chris. Let's jump into this question as pre-submitted, and then the chat is blowing up. So we will kind of get a couple more in, and then we'll move to Q&A. So how do you account for unquantifiable signals? meaning there's no custom attributes in the CRM. So this could be offline interaction, seeing a comment on social, engaging in a community. Of course, these signals would apply to your products, but it's way harder to track them. So how do you get your sales team to tell you why they reached out if it's not trackable in your tools that you're using?
I would say that instead of trying to measure the like 0.1% of signals that you can't track, like a LinkedIn comment or things like that, like the examples provided are very small volume, that the priority should be focused on all the signals that you use that are trackable, which leads you to massive insights in the data that you already have. And I think we just need, it's not even the 80-20 rule, it's like the 99.9 to 0.1% rule in this case of just focusing on the place where we have all the data already and then prioritizing how we handle it. The same thing goes where companies are like, let's start our podcast, or like, let's go invest 3% more of the budget in brand, while they waste so much money in Google ads and content syndication and large scale trade shows and things like that. It's not that we shouldn't do those things or that we shouldn't try. It's that when we think about prioritization, we should prioritize the things that have the most data and the highest impact first. Which just, there's very few sales reps that are consistently in a high volume way using LinkedIn comments to drive their activity. It's just not a common signal. And I think we just need to focus on the things where we can learn the most fastest first. And just furthermore, I don't think I would ever advocate for having manual data entry from our sales team around signals. That creates more work for our most expensive human capital resources that's most likely very unreliable at the same time. Our goal when we think about signals is to improve the process and make our human capital most expensive resources the most efficient, not add manual inefficient work to their job. So trying to figure out how we can automate as much as possible. And if we can't, then having to make decisions around whether it's even worth collecting at this stage or not. Over time, there'll probably be tools that are able to, I know there are tools that already scrape LinkedIn comments and try and find stuff like that. But I think to just hammer home the point, I think it's just an order of prioritization.
Okay. I love the concept of signals, but trying to understand, does this play into the hero concept at all? And how do you think about conversion and standardization with signals versus a previous approach of hero?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I'm most proud of as I don't even really consider myself a thought leader, but for lack of a better term, like paving the way for how we do things, is that over time, there are technology shifts. There are shifts in how the market works, which requires us to rethink some of the concepts and things that we've done in the past. And I think the major shifts around moving from the growth at all costs era to profitable, efficient growth, combined with the massive development of AI, combined with the rapid scale in terms of data that has availability of signals and how RevOps has been evolving and the ability to track and collect that data and have companies have the capabilities to do that, there are just changes that are happening that require us to revisit certain concepts. So the hero concept of basically using a definition based on win rate to determine when something is qualified based on what we called pipeline sources, whether it was outbound or inbound or things like that. The core rationale of how you calculate hero was based on a concept of pipeline sources, which forced you to say that was inbound, that was outbound, that was partner, that was events, which I no longer believe in as a concept. And so therefore, if you strip out pipeline sources and you challenge that concept, that it forces you to challenge the hero concept. In which case I still think that there's value in looking at the conversion from a stage 2 opportunity to closed won and looking at that. But instead of looking at it by pipeline sources, which in some ways is very subjective, that we're going to be looking at it based on the signal, which is data driven and objective. And so it just sort of changes how we look at it. So I think using signals forces us to rethink the hero concept, in which case you could just look at stage 2 to closed won or any other conversion through the pipeline, because now you'd have the architecture to be able to look at the volume, conversion, and velocity between every stage from signal all the way to closed won. And Sydney, feel free to add in some additional concepts here or additional thoughts, but that's how we've evolved in the way we think about it at Paceto. It doesn't mean that the hero concept is bad. It doesn't mean that the pipeline sources concept you shouldn't use anymore. It's just that as we've thought about analytics, we're challenging some of the things that we have initially thought.
Yeah, the main distinction there is that it was someone's opinion of classifying all these different types of things into pipeline sources. And we're kind of saying, let's just track the data how it is and let that inform the conversion rate, the win rate from a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 by your signal types and your signal categories. So you can definitely categorize your signals based on the data, and that's something that we're still exploring. Okay, let's jump into one or two more topics, and then we've got a bunch of people queued up in the chat that I will bring on next. So you've talked about signal aggregators, signal creators, and how some people's entire job is to create signals and budget is to create signals. Can you kind of go through, like in your head, what is the signal ecosystem so people can understand the differences in all these signal messages and technology that's out there right now?
Yeah. So first off, it's to just break down the idea of signals. And I think the best way to break it down is to look at it as first party, second party potentially, and then third party signals. And then, so you have first party signals, which could be form fills, event data, product data, de-anonymized website data, whether that's at the person level or account level. You have all this stuff that come from, scraped from your own community. There's all this data that come from your first party owned assets. I'm going to exclude second party, but data that comes through partner integrations and stuff like that is more or less what that is. And then you have third party data, which could be like somebody read this blog over here, or like they were on this account was on this review site, or there's a million different iterations of that where the data that's coming through doesn't come from an asset that you own. Now, that's the first distinction. Then in a totally different dimension, we look at the idea of what are the layers of the technology that happen in the signal category. So at this point, the way that I see it is there are 3 subcategories, and over time, there will be a lot more definition around it. You have a signal provider. Think Bambora, Trust Radius, G2, User Gems. What they do is they look in a specific area and they provide a third-party signal. They can provide that to you directly, or they can move into the second category, which is a signal aggregator. So a signal aggregator like Demandbase or 6sense might take the signal from a signal provider, mix it with a bunch of other data like your first-party website data and other third-party sources, and aggregate that all together, and then deliver you data, whether it's transparent or some companies choose to deliver it in a black box. So you have signal aggregators that bring a bunch of signals together, first and third party, and then deliver them to you, which basically just consolidates the amount of vendors that you have. And then what we play at Paceto is the signal analytics, which is being able to measure all the different signal providers and all the different signal aggregators and all the signals that those people provide to identify to you as a company, what are the signals that are most effective for my customer and my go-to-market motion, broken down either blended or by segment, region, or any other type of segmentation. And so that's how I see the categories broken up. Most of the players today and the people that are promoting signals are a signal provider or a signal aggregator. And what those companies do is they package and sell you data. And the reason there's a lot of vendors in that space is because selling data is the highest margin thing that you could ever sell. And at Paceto, we're focused on measuring the outcomes of those signals, which is what I see not a lot of companies focused on today. Over time, we'll have aggregated data to say what are the best providers across this market or for this buyer. But even to an individual company, our value prop would be what are the best signals. You have thousands of signals. You have 20 different providers and aggregators inside of your stack. What are the things that actually matter inside of these tools, with the goal of reducing go-to-market bloat, not only in technology, but also all of the other places in headcount and programs where go-to-market and role specialization where go-to-market bloat happens. So that's how I would break down how you have signal-based go-to-market, and then underneath that, you have providers, aggregators, and analytics vendors.
Love it. Hopefully that'll be helpful for people. We get a lot of questions around that. Okay, I'm bringing on Mr. David.
Hello, Chris. I have a question about signals.
Let's roll. That's what we're here for.
Okay, so how do we remove the subjectivity from signals? How can we make this more objective? I'll give you an example. It's January. David is the VP of sales. I like certain signals. I want my team to work on certain signals. Come June, David gets laid off. Someone new joins, let's say Chris joins in July. Chris has other signals that he likes. And so now the team is going to react to different signals. Maybe there'll be some added, maybe some dropped, right? Maybe it's at the edges that things change. So I'm trying to figure out for myself how to make this be more objective. So perhaps you've got some thoughts on that so that we don't, my fear is that if it becomes too subjective, then I don't know if I've got a definition that I can hang my hat on, no pun intended, because it depends on who's looking. And they say, well, I know a signal when I see one, and it depends on who's doing the looking.
That's pretty much how it happens today. So
it is how it happens today.
Yeah. And whether it's just the head of sales or it's people that have opinions across the entire executive team or the go-to-market, and whether there are job changes or whether the same person's the CRO and changes their mind every 6 months, like that's how it happens today. The gap is having the signal analytics data that then takes it away from being subjective, I like these and I don't like these, to we had thousands of signals, we collected millions of data points and the disposition of those data points, and here are all the signals sorted from top to bottom in terms of sales velocity, sales productivity, signal to win, CAC, other details like that. And that's what a chief revenue officer really wants if they want to be able to hit their goals, and especially if a chief revenue officer eventually gets gold on not only effectiveness, but also efficiency, which is something that needs to happen at some point in the go-to-market.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, and perhaps you were saying this before and I just didn't hear it quite the same way, is that at your company, the signal or things that we can define as signals or positive signals, because presumably you can have negative signals too, right? Positive signals are things that have been found to somewhat statistically correlate, to the best that we're able to do, to show that this is a sign, if you will, of real movement, of something significant that is worthy of your time to now get involved with as a person, or to trigger a workflow, whether it's automated in people or whatever it might be. So it's kind of like the hero definition a little bit, in that you could have it, but it happens pre-sales process, presumably, because it's found to be reliable and predictive. Am I kind of working my way towards where you are? Does that work?
Couple things. So the first realization is that pipeline doesn't start when your rep opens the opportunity. Pipeline starts when the first person of human capital reaches out to the person that you're trying to get to. And so companies have this entire black hole in the pre-sales process that happened between when there's a signal, sales team takes action, and then all the way till it gets to an opportunity, and that data is not connected. So where pipeline starts needs to change, and look at it as an entire go-to-market team, not structured siloed departments where marketing creates MQLs, or SDRs convert leads to contacts, and then sales converts them into opportunities, and you have disparate data sources. So that's one thing. The next thing is that it's not like you have positive signals and negative signals, is that you have a spectrum of performance from the highest performing thing based on certain data like sales velocity or signal to win, all the way to the lowest. And if you sorted it, there's really just, you have a cream of the crop and then you have a bunch of total garbage, like more or less. And being able to have that data and not just have the CRO look at it in their Excel report that or the RevOps team that like manipulates all this data and comes up with some Excel report, but to have the entire go-to-market team align on this and see this as a report overall, which then drives how marketing dollars are spent, how many sales headcount we have, how much we use AI in prospecting, how many sales resources we have, how we plan and forecast, how we think about our financial guardrails and our KPIs. That is like the power of having this data that spans across the entire go-to-market, not having marketing metrics over here and SDRs and sales metrics over here.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So then perhaps what helps to unpack it for me is to have something before a signal. Just like there used to be a thing before an MQL, and that the thing before the signal would be the data point. And some data points warrant becoming signals at company X because of their proven benefit, if you will. And company Y, the same signal may not have that same proven benefit, may not come out to be the same quality of signal, right? So just like in the old waterfall that is much maligned, and for many good reasons, I'm not going to try and defend it, there used to be a thing called an inquiry, and only a very small subset of inquiries turned into MQLs. And then that kind of got forgotten over time and different business models, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe having this step before, so that I know that some things are signals and some things are not signals, but they have a place. And if you are able to, you capture them. Because what often I've found is that what you didn't know was a signal, with hindsight, oh, now I understand this thing before that I wasn't thinking of as a signal might actually be a signal in combination with this data point may have signal qualities, especially in combination with other data points. Does that help, or am I muddying the waters in your view?
It's the difference between a touch point and a signal. We're not saying that you shouldn't measure every single part of the data that you can. You just have to be very clear about when you're going to invest human capital, about the effectiveness of that human capital. And so the way that you see it long term is that companies have all this different historical data that their sales team took action on. There's going to be things in there that say, these are proven signals. We're going to keep working on them. We're going to try and figure out ways to create more of them. We have all these things that are shown to not deliver what we need to deliver in terms of sales productivity and sales effectiveness that we're going to eliminate. And then there's going to be new signals that come in that are experimental that we're going to run and collect data on, that then we're going to decide, is this a proven signal that we're going to keep going or we're going to remove it? And you just have...
That's where you confuse me.
Yeah.
When you have new signals coming in that are experiments, it sounds as if a signal is derived from the data points and the touch points. You may have new touch points and new motions that bring you different kind of responses, and that looking at the responses, you discern, oh, that's actually turning out to be an interesting kind of response worthy of, let's call that a signal. Did I catch? I mean, you're speaking live on the call, so you may have just muddled your words up in the moment.
No, you have to make an arbitrary decision at first before you collect the data. Companies have made arbitrary decisions around all the signals that their sales team takes action on. Some of the companies don't even make the decision. Their sales team just goes rogue and does it, which happens mostly in independent sales prospecting. So at some point at the beginning, you have to arbitrarily say, this is something worth exploring. We don't know if it's going to work, but let's act on it and let's collect the data, and then let's make a data-driven decision around whether we should keep going or not.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
But companies have a lot of historical data that we figured out at Paceto how to reverse engineer to identify and isolate the signals where their sales team has taken action on, which gives us a lot of fast learnings about what's already happened in the past, which then help us make rapid optimizations into the future without having to go through the cycle of collecting that data. Like, a lot of the patterns are they're not easy to get out of the data. We've built technology around that, but once you see them, it makes common sense. Most people think it was already happening anyway, and it gives them the data they need to make decisions that they've been sitting on for a while.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I don't want to take up all the airtime. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I appreciate
great
this.
questions.
I know there'll be more questions on this. I'm trying to think it through and catch up with you, perhaps, or perhaps identify holes. So with due all respect, of course.
Yeah, keep rolling. It pushes us to keep learning. So I appreciate it as well. As when I did it, when we were talking about demand creation and demand capture, I appreciated it just as much. So you have a ton of experience in the industry and you've seen a bunch of stuff and love the questions.
All right. We have a hot chat thread that's all about HubSpot. So I'll bring Casper on to ask his question, and maybe we'll tag team this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question is pretty simple. We're just talking about how to actually implement it. And I asked for specifically HubSpot because it seems like the go-to would having on an enterprise plan, you would go for a custom object. But if you're not on an enterprise plan, we are curious if there's any workarounds or basically how to implement the signals in HubSpot.
Yeah, and Sydney, feel free to chime in because I know you've been doing a couple of these with customers. So the current solution, and some companies have tried this in Salesforce, and you could probably replicate the same thing in HubSpot, although I don't know the limitations of the tool, and I know that it's not as flexible and not as expected as what you would find in Salesforce right now, is to use a custom object that tracks signals and associate with all those objects and build custom automation that connects the data and stamps data and looks for it and collects it. That over time will become very difficult to maintain and is not an ideal solution for people, which is what we're trying to solve for at Paceto and expect to have a solution, at least for Salesforce, in the coming months. But many companies, large companies, spend 9 months building the custom object inside of Salesforce and then don't even use it properly afterwards, or only use it to track product signups or one part of the go-to-market, not the whole thing. And so I saw Liam nodding his head. The custom object, I think, is a great way to put it together for yourself right now. But we don't see it as the ideal long-term solution. Sydney, with that, maybe you can share some of the things that you've been doing to give some people some more action for people that want to try to get it done sooner.
Yeah, the current approach, like Chris said, is the custom object in either system. You need a unique data point that can be associated with a lot of other things that you are tracking: deals, opportunities, accounts, all of these other objects. But you need it to be independent of all of those objects, which is the key thing, which is why for now a custom object is what is mainly used. The other challenge with a custom object is the analytics and the visualizations that you are limited to in those tools. I think everyone can agree that the Salesforce reports are basic at best, which is why a lot of people pull all of this data out of Salesforce and all of the other tools into a BI, data analytics and visualization tool. But in order to do that, you likely need to have a BI team and have the resources to then spend effort to take that data, manipulate it, and visualize it in a way that's helpful for people like myself or your CMO or your CRO and your marketing manager and your sales person to look at this data and to know what to do with it. So that's the current approach. I know specifically in HubSpot, if you're not on the enterprise plan, you're going to look at how you could kind of hack some things together using the lead. Some people have been experimenting using the new lead as, instead of it being what HubSpot defines as a lead, as using that object as a signal object. There's going to be limitations to that as well. There's, no matter what approach kind of you take in your CRM, there's going to be pros and cons. That's, I guess, a high level overview of where we're at. And we've architected this in custom objects in both systems and have been seeing the pros and cons of that, which are informing of why we are building what we are building. All right, next I'm going to bring up Mason.
Hi there. Big fan. First time actually live here, so forgive me. But
great to have you here.
Yeah, honored to be here. So you mentioned, Chris, you mentioned a lot analyzing pipeline, based off of meaningful metrics and stuff like that. I'm just curious to know, where do marketing mix models kind of fit into that? And what are some of the drawbacks? Because it seems like there are a lot, very similar to what we could have with multi-touch attribution, because it's all quant. So there's a lot of pitfalls as far as what can't be tracked with that. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think it again just comes down to how should we prioritize what we're doing in terms of our analytics and how we do things. When you look at the concept of measuring signals and allowing that to optimize how you deploy marketing investments, SDRs, sales headcount, agencies and fractionals, RevOps people, technology and tools, that the impact of looking at signals gives you a clear, meaningful roadmap of how to improve your ROI on marketing, sometimes, or ROI on go-to-market, sometimes by 2x, reduce your CAC in half, just by using this data to identify the things that clearly we invest human capital where it creates GTM bloat, or we buy tools that do not provide the appropriate ROI. And when you think about multi-touch attribution or marketing mix modeling or other these forms of statistics, you do not get clear answers around what are the right things to be able to look at or not. You do not. So it becomes very opinionated. Do we use a W or a U? If we look at it two different ways, we'll get two completely different answers. Who's the one to decide which one we use? Then we sit in a boardroom and we argue about which attribution model we should use because one person wants the W because they have their programs that look better in a W. Another person's arguing for a U because their shit looks better in a U. And all of a sudden we just do nothing with it because it's really complicated to analyze and it's very subjective. I think that marketing mix modeling potentially has promise in the future, but should not be a top priority inside of most B2B companies today, given where they spend and deploy their investments, which are mostly to create signals and to take action against those signals. Additionally, most marketing mix models have the same, many of the same flaws that come with multi-touch attribution related to all the things that are created that happen within dark social that are not measured, that are difficult to account for changes in the market that happen that have nothing to do with our go-to-market, but because things in the market are down and people are buying less things and interest rates have gone up, that those have impacts that are difficult to account for in statistics, that perhaps marketing mix modeling works really well when you're Coca-Cola. I'd even argue and debate whether it's valuable for Coca-Cola or a big CPG brand that has 30 million people that they market to or 300 million people that they market to across a ton of different channels. But is it really that valuable when we sell to 1,000 fucking accounts? Do we have enough statistical relevance to be able to actually use that to make decisions? I do not agree that we can use that because too much of it is based on chance and timing and economics and things like that, that I do not believe there are enough data points to really use those statistics to make strong, informed decisions. So am I a statistical expert? Am I some nerd that goes in there and nerds out about that stuff? No, I get most of my data from listening to customers and looking at obvious data that drive massive improvements to go to market without implementing a new tool and waiting 9 months to see whether or not it actually gives us the right stuff. Additionally, most marketing mix models are built around reach and frequency. That as long as we just deliver enough ads to enough of the right people, that eventually they'll decide to buy. And I think that's one of the major downfalls with most internal MMMs that get created for Fortune 500 and CPG brands, because it drives them to spend a majority of their money on trade desk and other types of display advertising because you get the biggest potential reach and the lowest CPMs, but also the lowest actualized consumption and the lowest effectiveness of the advertising dollars. It drives them to spend money on display ads, commercial TV commercials on cable that most people are not watching anymore. And if you just look at what's happening in the Fortune 500 CPG brands, most of those companies have market share being eaten by companies that are smarter in how they market and sell, that Fortune 500 brands can't do because they're constrained and restricted by their internal MMMs that they create. And the same thing happens with big B2B brands. They just use multi-touch attribution and a multi-touch attribution model that constrains them. And so for a variety of reasons, the potential flaws in MMMs, but also the fact that just like there are clear, obvious data points that come from signals and other forms of analytics that would make a massive impact for B2B companies. So instead of trying to be a mad scientist and implement MMMs, why don't we focus on easy data points that make massive impacts to our go-to-market first? That's just my position overall.
Great. Thanks, Mason. And good to see you. Hopefully you come back and we'll see your face more often. All right. Ryan, also good to see you.
Hey, good to see you. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Hey, man. Great to see you.
Awesome. Hey, I just wanted to get your opinion on the use of signals once a deal is in pipeline. Kind of, what are your thoughts? How do you think about using it? Is it the same as going after a cold audience, or is just kind of want to hear your thoughts on it?
Yeah, to be really clear, signals are around the thing that happens that drive our sales team to take an initial action. And so if we have things that happen beyond that, once things are in pipeline or we have a meeting or they're in stage 4, that would no longer be defined as a signal. It would be defined as a touch point that happens on an opportunity. And then in that case, perhaps using things like statistics or holdout groups or other things like that have value in that part of the process. But what I'll say is that most B2B companies will spend less than 3% of the entire go-to-market budget to optimize that part of the process. And so while it's valuable, I don't think that it's the number one priority as a go-to-market team and unit. But certainly there's value. I know this because in 2017, when we had a big account that was in stage 4, we would have our expert thought leader and one of our like clinical researchers and 2 of our best customers in the area go and have a dinner with that account. And we'd have 12 people at a dinner, and we would most often have that contract signed after that dinner in like 5 to 7 days. Right. And that is a way to accelerate pipeline, a strong investment that you can use to close certain deals that have the appropriate lifetime value to close them, that have an impact on either sales cycles, win rates, deal sizes, or other things like that. So I know that there's value in those things, or at the top level, just running LinkedIn ads to the buying group of an account that's in stage 4 theoretically could have an impact on that account closing or the deal size or the sales cycle and things like that. So we should focus on thinking about doing those things, but it's different than one. It's different than a signal, and 2, it's not the biggest It's not anywhere close to the biggest investment that happens in go-to-market. So it just wouldn't be my number one priority. But as a like digital marketer like yourself, that if I think about if I was a digital marketer today and I was trying to figure out how do I make the most tangible impact for the business, not necessarily the most measurable impact, the first place I would start is advertising and other forms of running campaigns and things like that, events, advertising to accounts that are stage 3 and beyond, stage 3 and later. How do we take the accounts that are in pipeline and use marketing to be able to close them faster? Then next, I would think about how do we use marketing dollars or improving processes to get people that are in market to buy into qualified meetings and qualified pipeline. Most of that is process optimization, not necessarily spending marketing dollars. And then how do we think about looking at signals to convert in-market buyers into meetings? And I would level. And then lastly, demand creation. And I would work from the closed one up. And that's how I would, if I started a director of demand gen job tomorrow, that would be my process from start to finish.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, maybe 2, depending on how fast we go here.
Right on.
I'll bring on Eli, and he'll ask his question.
We got you.
Yes. Okay, perfect. I was just gonna ask what I'm trying to wrap my head around like the data sources and like the data sources for the custom object on Salesforce. What kind of data are you bringing into that custom objects for the signals?
I'll try to rattle off things that are in my head. I'll also say that we're keeping these cards pretty close to the chest because there's so many people infringing on our intellectual property. So I don't think we're going to be publishing this broadly, which is sad for the community, but it's just a reality of how the world works right now. But the signal first has to be created by a source. And so that source could be trust radius, it could be G2, it could be user gems, it could be ZoomInfo cold list pull, it could be a form fill, it could be an event, a data from an event platform or something that we uploaded about an event that already happened. It could be from our product. It could be from an anonymous website visit or an account level data. There's a variety of, those are all the signals, right? So the signal gets created when the signal happens. Then you are going to pull in any other additional information about that signal, specifically like more details around the signal. If we used a trigger, if we spent money to trigger that signal to happen, what was that trigger? For instance, a Google advertisement, and then all the data around the Google ad. You then collect contact information. If you enrich that data, you have a lot of information about that contact. Then you pull in account information. Then you have all the stages around whether it's converting to a meeting, when the rep followed up, what cadence they used, all that different data. Then you're going to have, if it creates an opportunity, then you're going to pull in all this opportunity data, like, ARR value, potentially customers do lifetime value or projected ARR, or all the different custom business requirements that they have. And you have all that stuff sitting on the signal object that then allow you to report. And then all of a sudden that moves to closed lost or recycled lead, and they come back and you just create a whole new thing.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
Happy to help.
Yeah. Also, spoiler alert, there's a lot of signals that you already have in your marketing automation system that just are not even tracked well. So there's a lot in there that you can architect. Well.
Yeah, simply like using signals across the entire go-to-market is amazing and a great vision. And I think what people should be working toward. But just implementing it for marketing would be relatively straightforward and easy. Most companies do not do it appropriately right now and would give them massive insights about where they waste a lot of money in marketing and all the opportunities that they're missing. So if you think about it as a staged approach, implementing it in marketing would definitely be the easiest and have a massive impact on the company.
Okay, we got 3 minutes, and I'm going to bring on Travis. We got a couple more for next week.
Cool. Let's keep it rolling. Love it.
Hey, Chris. So I want to get your take on some of the confusion that I think for some of us, we're looking for the blueprint. Here are the signals we use. Here's how we build it. And this is, just go do it, right? But I think from what I'm hearing is really what we need to do is build the signal catching framework, analyze it ourselves, and decide for ourselves or as an organization what is producing the most value from a win-loss perspective. Is that what's your take on that?
Sydney, maybe chime in because I'm not sure I understand the question all that well. To recognize that today there's some level of this tracked. It's just not tracked consistently or very well. And it's usually just marketing data. And then the marketing data is not comprehensive to make like full, clear decisions because companies choose to use multi-touch attribution as a replacement to pipeline architecture and signal analytics when it's not. So some companies will just take data from the lead and then copy it to the contact and then try and copy it to the opportunity. And then you have MQL source on the opportunity. And that gives you some level of ways to optimize, but you don't really have all the data around all the times that you lost like you would with a signal object. Some companies will try to use multi-touch attribution and then look at the conversion touch point, i.e. like what they would view as last touch, but the limitations, especially with Visible, do not collect enough of the data. So sometimes you don't know what form, they filled out a web form, but you don't know what form they filled out. That really matters. Maybe they filled out a form, but you don't know where they came from. Did they come from Google SEO? What campaign? Like, was it a Google ad? What campaign was it from? Was it a referral from a different source? Sometimes that data is not there. And so if you just were able to tighten up that structure, Visible is not going to get you there because it's not built to collect that stuff. Some companies could then use like just using primary campaign source or a better structure for campaigns would allow them to get some of that data. I'm starting to get a little technical, but I'm just talking through some of the options here as like short-term workarounds. The reason that we created Paceto is because this is not easy. If it was easy, then somebody else would have already done it, or there would be a best practice out there about how to implement in your CRM. And 2 years ago, I thought the best practice was to hire a marketing ops firm or to hire my company and have that, or have your team have a best practice and implement it in your own CRM. And having done this really a lot for the past 5 months, I've determined that is, while it would be a step forward, it's not a viable long-term solution. It requires a ton of maintenance. Most ops teams are blocked and can't actually get this done for themselves. Frankly, a lot of operations teams do not have the technical capabilities to be able to actually do this themselves. And so we need a much more sustainable, viable long-term solution, which is what we're building. And then in the short term, we've created ways to basically retroactively look at the data, which helps people get some things that you're not going to be able to replicate in-house. We've been building that type of like software for more than a year now. And so I'm trying to get to the root of your question, but I don't think I really understood what you were asking. So you let me know if I went in the wrong direction and I'll try to focus it.
No, I think you did. I think really it's the fact that it's complicated and that the tools that exist now aren't really optimized to pull everything together to kind of shine the light on what's working in an efficient, effective way, right?
Yeah, and that's why we do this group, to be 100% honest. And just like in 2020, when I started talking about lead gen to demand gen and didn't have all the answers and nobody else had all the answers and it was something new, that we were able to figure it out together. And all of you participating were able to learn, but also to give us a lot of feedback so that we were able to figure it out faster. And it's sort of this loop where we're able to do it. And so that's why we have this event, to be able to accelerate both your learnings as well as our ability to deliver on something that's really valuable to you. And at the beginning, nobody has it figured out. But what is clear is there's a massive market problem and that this is the best short-term solution that is not available in the market today. And so the community just allows us to hopefully figure it out a lot faster.
Thanks, Chris.
And then it's great because like back in the day, David would do a bunch of stuff, or a bunch of other people would hear what we're saying, and they would try to do something inside of their own CRM, and they'd find an innovation, and they would be able to bring it back here. And then they taught us something that we didn't know. They taught everybody something that we didn't know. So it's just cool to be able to provide the information to you, because a lot of you are super smart people and you don't want to wait 4 months or however long it's going to take us to have a viable solution. So you're going to try some things yourselves, and you're going to innovate in ways that we didn't think of. And we can all learn from each other.
Totally.
Cool. Great way to end. Really appreciate all of the feedback that you provide, all of the amazing ideas, for all of you showing up. Hope you all come back consistently, or at least I see a lot of consistent faces. So that indicates to me that it's a valuable use of your time, which makes me happy as well. I hope that we see this as a equal value. Like, we put on the show, but we actually get a lot of the value back from you all participating, which is I think a core reason why we do the show in this format. So just want to thank you all for that, and for helping us get to where we want to go, and for participating in the show. So hope you all have a great rest of your week. Hope to see you again next Tuesday. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.